We'll finish this lecture by looking at three arguments that attempt to undermine or diminish oppositional substance dualism's promise, or that attempt to bolster or advocate for the potential associated with monism. The first argument is one with which we're familiar by now, the argument from the problem of interaction. Physical causality requires the exertion of a fundamental force acting in space. This means that our cause has to have dimensionality. If it's going to exert gravity, it's got to have mass. Electromagnetic force requires charge. At the very least, it has to have weak nuclear force for particle decay or strong nuclear force to keep particles together. But none of these properties seem to be properties that mental substances admit of. Let's consider an example. Suppose I'm in my car and I release energy in molecular bonds in the fuel to accelerate the car. Because my body has dimensionality, it can be the subject of the contact force. The car can push me forward and accelerate me. Because I have mass, I obey inertia, and so I exhibit a certain inertial resistance to acceleration. At the same time, my mind also seems to be going along for the ride, but my mind has no dimensionality. There's no contact point for my car's acceleration to push it forward. It has no mass. So, does it exhibit inertial resistance to acceleration? Is it subject to inertia at all? When we start to think about it, it's not clear how my mind gets related to any particular place in space and time at all. Phenomenologically, our minds are right there behind our eyes. But why and how would a non-dimensional entity have such a permanent fixed point? Why is it that my mind is right behind my eyes all the time, instead of down in my toes, or over in my dresser, down the street, in my dog? Why does my mind not only attach itself to my body, but to a specific orientation to my body? None of that really seems to make sense once we start to think about it. Consider a different example. I stick my finger with a pin. That triggers the reflex arc that runs from the nociceptors in my skin that detect that pinprick into my spine through the dorsal horn. That triggers the motor circuit to then fire back, and I have an automatic withdrawal of my hand. All of this is well understood and completely explicable physiologically. The question now arises, what role does the painful experience play if the entire event has a physiological explanation? You conclude, therefore, that mental substance, as understood by the oppositional substance dualist, couldn't possibly causally interact with physical substance. And of course, we noted when we were looking at ways in which we might tweak oppositional substance dualism that even if we were to find ways for the mind and the body to interact, that it would wreak havoc on the physical order, violating, for instance, conservation of energy and conservation of matter, and so on. We could codify that last set of concerns in its own argument, the argument from incompatibility of mental substance with physical substance. Our first premise says, interactive mind-body oppositional substance dualism supposes that mental substance introduces non-physical causation into the physical world. So, for example, when my mental states cause my body to move around. Causal interactions that follow from any acceptable theory of mind must not violate fundamental laws that are extremely well advanced by empirical data. For example, the conservation of energy, the conservation of mass. Therefore, mind-body oppositional substance dualism is not an acceptable theory of mind in that mental to physical causation or physical to mental causation would violate such important fundamental laws.